Hey everyone, glad to have you with us as we take a deep dive into some prophecies about America's future.
Yeah, we're gonna be looking at some pretty interesting stuff today.
Definitely. Our main source is it's this book called The Fate of America in the Bible, a clarion call to all noble Americans.
Written by Vincent Michael.
Right, Vincent Michael. And he really makes you think, he pulls these connections between historical empires and the USA.
Oh yeah, he uses prophecies from Isaiah, Jeremiah,
Daniel.
even Revelations. It's a lot to cover.
It is, but it's really fascinating how Michael uses the fall of Babylon as a framework to understand America's possible fate.
Okay, yeah. So America has this modern day Babylon. What kind of parallels does he draw between the two?
Well, he compares the towers of Babylon to New York City's skyscrapers.
Oh wow, okay.
And he also points to how brutal Roman gladiators were.
Yeah.
And he compares that to modern combat sports. So he's not just talking about physical things, like buildings or sports, but also deeper stuff.
Yeah. Values, spiritual patterns. He's arguing that those patterns repeat throughout history. And what's really wild is he thinks it's not just coincidence. He says the same spirits who built and lived in those old empires are actually reincarnated in the USA today.
Wait, hold on. Reincarnated. Is he saying that the actual people who lived in ancient Babylon are now living in America?
That's exactly what he's saying. And get this, they bring the burden of their past actions with them.
He calls them
Territorial sins. The land itself is marked by what people did, and it passes down through reincarnation. It affects a nation's destiny.
Okay, so every American is carrying these sins from the past.
Well, not every single one. He says it's mostly the spirits of those who, enslaved Africans or oppressed Jewish people in the past.
So they're now in America, and that's a major factor.
Yeah, he believes so.
That's a lot to think about, because America, we think of ourselves as a Christian nation, a friend to Israel, So how does that fit into this new Babylon idea?
That's what he's getting at. He says America might claim to be righteous, but we're guilty of the same sins as Babylon.
Okay, so which sins specifically?
Oh, he lists a bunch. Oppression, usurpation, murder.
Right.
Embracing what he calls the immorality of Sodom and Gomorrah. He's also against stuff like genetic manipulation.
Like messing with God's natural order.
Exactly. He's basically saying America has strayed from a righteous path.
And that's going to have consequences.
Big time. He believes America's actions are inviting divine judgment. And it's kind of scary how he thinks this judgment will happen.
Okay, now you got to tell me.
Yeah.
How's it all supposed to go down?
He talks about this vision he had of a comet sent by God.
A comet.
Yeah, and it's going to trigger huge tsunamis and earthquakes. It'll weaken America, leave it open to attack
I'm guessing from
Russia and China.
Right, he mentioned them earlier.
He calls them Media and Elam. They're biblical names. They'll see their chance and they'll attack, wanting to take America's wealth. Not a pretty picture.
So is everyone in America doomed? Is there no hope at all?
He does offer some hope. He talks about these noble Americans. They're the ones who will escape the judgment.
Okay, so who are they? And how do they escape this whole thing?
He's a little vague on the details, but he says they're the people who have admitted their sins and repented, and they've rejected what he calls the real Antichrist.
The real Antichrist. Interesting. So there's a way out for some, but it sounds like a pretty big change in how you think and act. I'm definitely curious to hear more about what he suggests people do to avoid this fate.
Well, that's a perfect place to stop for now, because it's exactly what we're going to get into next. How Michael thinks people can change their destiny, even when faced with prophecy. It's really something how Michael connects what people do with this spiritual awakening to, Old Testament prophecies. He doesn't see them as just predicting the future, but offering guidance for right now,
Right, we talked about Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Zechariah, even John's Revelations. But how does he connect those prophecies to America specifically?
Well, he goes through each one and pulls out these verses that he thinks relate directly to America's path. Isaiah talks about this nation coming from the north to bring destruction. He thinks this could be about Russia.
Oh, okay, so he's interpreting those prophecies through what's happening in the world today.
Yeah. He sees them as having a spiritual message that's timeless, but also applies to our time specifically. And it's not just Russia either. He points to those parts in Jeremiah where it describes Babylon's destruction, all that intense imagery. desolation, fire, all that. He thinks that's a foreshadowing of what'll happen to America.
It's like he's using these prophecies as a blueprint for how America's going to fall.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He even links those prophecies to that vision he had of the comet, you know? Like, those words from Jeremiah match up with what could happen because of this comet.
And what about that prophecy from Daniel? You mentioned it earlier about the stone cut out without hands that destroys the statue of the four kingdoms.
Oh yeah, that's a big part of his argument. That stone is like a symbol of divine judgment to him. And he thinks it's the comet. It's what'll shatter America's power, and then everything changes.
Wow. So Isaiah's pointing to Russia, Jeremiah's describing destruction, Daniel's prophecy about the stone is the comet. What about Zechariah? What does he say?
Zechariah's a little different. The other prophets, they focus on the judgment, the bad stuff coming. But Zechariah, he talks about what happens after. God's people being saved from Babylon, and then peace and prosperity starting over.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope in Zechariah's prophecies.
Right. And Michael thinks it's talking about those noble Americans finding safety and like a spiritual rebirth happening. Even with all the destruction, there's potential for a new start.
It's a strong message, especially since so much of his book is about the bad things that could happen because of America's actions.
It's like he's giving us a map, not just of destruction, but of renewal too, a kind of purification. And then there's John's Revelations. That book is full of intense, even scary images about the end of the world.
Yeah, Revelations. That one always gets people talking. What does Michael say about that in relation to America?
He focuses on the parts about Mystery Babylon, this rich and powerful nation that gets judged for its sins. He thinks it's talking about America, and he points to the verses about a nation being drunk on the blood of prophets and saints.
Oh, that's pretty intense imagery. What does he mean by that?
He's talking about America's history of violence and oppression, both inside the country and around the world. And it goes back to that idea that America's carrying the weight of all those sins from past empires, especially persecuting those who spoke out against them.
So he's saying America's being judged because it hasn't learned from the past.
Exactly. And he's not just talking about history either. He points to things happening now that he thinks are signs of America's moral decline.
Like what does he see as signs of that decline?
He's really against materialism. He thinks it's like worshiping stuff instead of God. He's also worried about, what he sees as too much promiscuity and people accepting different sexualities. He sees it as moral decay.
He doesn't hold back, does he?
Nope. He's very clear about what he believes. And there's more. He criticizes things like genetic manipulation, scientific progress. He says it's people trying to play God and that there will be consequences.
So it's not a very positive picture of America right now. Morally, spiritually, it's pretty bleak. But I remember he talks about those noble Americans, right? The ones who escape judgment.
That's right. He thinks that even with all this bad stuff, there's still hope for people who are willing to change. The people who see that America's on the wrong path and choose a different way, they can maybe avoid the fate that's coming.
Okay, but what does that look like, actually? How do you become one of those noble Americans?
That's something he doesn't really answer. He's more focused on the big picture, judgment and redemption on a huge scale. But he gives us some hints about what it takes to escape.
So he doesn't, give us a list, how to be a noble American. What does he suggest people actually do to, prepare for this judgment?
He keeps saying it's about repenting and getting in line with God's will. First, you got to see where we've gone wrong, as individuals and as a whole country.
I notice he talks a lot about personal responsibility, even when it's about, the fate of the whole nation. It's even if America's doomed, each person can still choose a different way for themselves.
Exactly. And that brings us back to, free will, destiny, can you choose, or is it all planned out? Michael seems to be saying, even if there's a plan, we still have a say in where we end up. Turn away from sin, be righteous, that's how you get on God's side. Maybe that's how you escape what's coming to everyone else.
That's actually kind of hopeful. Even with all the talk about comets and everything, no matter what's happening, we can choose to be good, to love, to make our own destiny,
Totally. And I think that's a big part of this whole deep dive. Sure, Michael's view of America's future is pretty dark, but he also says there's hope. He says even when things are bad, we can change. It's like he's challenging us to look at our lives and make choices based on what we really believe in.
This has been really fascinating. Ancient prophecies, what's happening in the world now, empires, and whether people can be redeemed. It's a lot.
Definitely. And we got to remember, this is just one way of looking at these prophecies. What Michael says makes you think, but it's not the only way to see it. The cool thing about these old texts is they can be interpreted in so many ways.
That's true. It's up to each person to, read them, think about different interpretations, and decide what they believe.
Exactly. And even if you don't agree with everything Michael says, his book makes you think about the stuff that shapes the world. The choices we make, what happens because of them, all of that.
Well said. So, wrapping up this deep dive, what's the main thing you hope people listening will take away?
I'd say, even if some prophecies sound scary, there's always a chance for hope, for things getting better. It's never too late to change, to do what we think is right. The choices we make right now, they're going to decide what the future's like. For us, and for the people who come after us.
That's a great point to end on. We can make a difference. Thanks for leading us through this. It's been really insightful.
My pleasure. And to everyone listening, keep exploring this stuff. Read the prophecies, see what different people say about them, make up your own mind. It's a journey trying to understand prophecy, but it's a good one.
For sure. Keep those minds open, keep asking questions, and remember, even when prophecies seem dark, there's always a light of hope out there. Until next time, happy deep diving.